ladies and gentlemen, put on your wetsuits, grab your goggles and your oxygen tank. It's time for a deep dive. My name is Eric Kavanagh, and today we'll be talking to CloudVelox. I'm very excited about this. It's actually our inaugural program. So let's dive right in, folks. Here's a slide about yours truly. You can find me on Twitter at Eric_Kavanagh. You can always email me. We have a hashtag of deep dive. So if you come across one of these archives and you want to ask a question, just tweet with the hashtag of deep dive. We'll be checking that on a regular basis, so you can always email me. We'll be talking to Vasu Subbiah. He is the VP of Products at CloudVelox. You can see they've got a hashtag there, or a handle, CloudVelox, and also his email is right there. And we're going to be talking about their product and what it does and what makes it special. So the mission of Deep Dive is really, as you can see here, to provide a very focused lens through which today's information workers can understand the unique nature of specific enterprise technologies. So it's an offline conversation between either yours truly or another analyst in our field and a vendor doing some interesting stuff. So we're really trying to enable a creative conversation about the technology itself, reveal what is very special about it, what separates it from the pack, so to speak, and also to get some interesting perspective on use cases. So we follow a very simple methodology here. It's the who, what, where, why, when, and how. So who exactly and which kinds of companies will use this technology? What's the nature of the technology? So what was the kernel? Where is it going? What's the general thought process around what this technology will do? Where in the enterprise do you deploy this thing? Why is this technology valuable to its customers and also to its partners? I should throw that in there. When should the technology be used? Obviously, sometimes in the life cycle or the business cycle of an organization, you have different times at which you do certain things. When is this technology deployed? And sometimes that's continuous. So how does this all fit together for modern users? Well, the topic for today, as you can probably glean from the name of the company, CloudVelox, is cloud. So I found this humorous little cartoon on the web. There's no cloud, just other people's computers. That's, it's half joking. It is true in a certain sense. But obviously the cloud has a whole architecture unto itself. And the cloud has really matured over the last 20 years to become an incredibly powerful engine that is really customized for different use cases. So think about the early cloud vendors like Yahoo, for example, or Excite, or Google. And then think of some of the newer cloud vendors like LinkedIn or Facebook or any of these software as a service providers. Well, those cloud infrastructures are very, very tightly controlled and designed with specific business use cases in mind. So that is really one of the benefits of the cloud, is that the companies that play in the cloud, well, frankly, if they're going to be successful, they know what they're doing, and they have a very specific idea in mind for how they architect their environment. So that's what we're going to be looking into today. So obviously things like economies of scale are important. Scalability in general is built in with the cloud, and that's huge for the business, right? If you think about the old way of doing things, of even client-server environments or the mainframe, of course, which is a bit more analogous to the cloud, I suppose, but still pretty different than cloud computing. If you think about that old way of doing things, well, you have to have IT guys. You really have to have a pretty big IT staff to load the applications, to balance the servers, to focus on the database part of the equation, to fix computers, to get your printers working. All this kind of stuff is what the traditional IT environment will provide for you. Well, the cloud, frankly, takes a lot of that and handles it for you. So because you have these economies of scale, cloud vendors can handle that stuff for you, and they can do what they are designed to do first and foremost, which is deliver this very specific, very focused business service. And of course, updates occur with minimal interruption, and disaster recovery reaches a whole new level of efficiency. And with that, I'm going to hand the keys to the WebEx to Vasu Subbiah from CloudVelox. Subbiah, I should say. And Vasu, just go ahead and share your screen and then show us what you got.
Eric, thank you so much for the introduction. I think this is going to be an exciting call. If you just give me a minute, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the application. Okay, so Eric, is this good?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so once again, thank you very much for the time you gave us, and I really appreciate everyone participating in this call. And so I'll just take a few minutes with the slides and then open it up for question and answers. As we talked about earlier, we can address questions as we go, as I complete the slide, or we can wait till the end, your choice. But my job today essentially is to introduce CloudVelox to the wider audience. And what CloudVelox does is basically we are a software company that enables the seamless mobility of application workloads to and from the cloud. So that's what CloudVelox is all about. And so for IT teams looking for an automated solution, CloudVelox enables customers to easily protect, scale, and mobilize their distributed apps and services into and between clouds, thereby eliminating many of the major barriers for the enterprise in the adoption of the cloud. So essentially, we are a software company, and as I go forward, you will notice I'll talk a little bit more about the services that we offer in detail. So as I mentioned, we are a software company, and our product is called One Hybrid Cloud, and that's our software platform. And so if you, over the past few years, talking to customers across across the segments, whether it's the enterprise, whether it's a state, local, or education, or for that matter, federal agencies, what's very obvious to me is that the amount of resources, or the qualified resources, if you will, that are available to enable the either migration or protection of application workload into the cloud is lacking. It's truly lacking, not in terms of not just numbers, but also in terms of skill set levels. And that's primarily because while cloud has solved a lot of complexities in managing the infrastructure, it has also introduced a certain amount of complexity in terms of the APIs and how much you have to learn about the cloud in order to start doing something meaningful with it. And so what CloudVelox has focused on is looking at some of the common use cases that customers might want to deploy in the cloud and seeing how we can automate some of the steps so that the end customer or the end user by default does not have to know much about the cloud. They still need to have a basic understanding, but some of the critical tasks that are required to execute the different use cases that we support are all automated. And thus what it provides is not only a immediate access to this beautiful elastic resource that's available in the form of cloud, but also it enables the customer to take advantage of this cloud and for example, in the case of dev test, they could expedite their development cycle. In the case of migration, they could move their application to the workload quickly. In the case of disaster recovery, they could protect their instances that are running in their data centers into the cloud very quickly. So I think that's one of the key things that we have focused on is how do we automate it and how do we make this as seamless as possible so that you can move your application workload from into one cloud or distribute it across multiple clouds. So
yeah, if I could just dive in real quick, that is very interesting because if you think about most of the cloud vendors today, they either provide, of course, storage for data, for example, or they provide functionality to perform certain business functions and processes. But what you're talking about is creating a bridge to the cloud that not only enables the movement of data, but actually enables the movement of workloads into the cloud and then results that back down to the on-prem environment. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. So that's you got it absolutely correctly. And so the way we look at it is that if we can build a sort of the highways are already there, right? If you look at the clouds as the cities, and there are the highways that are interstate highways or whatever that are already built in the form of internet and different transport mechanisms. Now the question is, how do you effectively leverage those mechanisms to move your workload from your current data center into the cloud or move to different clouds, right? I mean, you may be running some applications in Microsoft Azure, for example. How do I protect that in Microsoft in a different region within Microsoft? Or how do I protect that application in AWS, right? So that is what CloudVelox has focused on in enabling a customer to move their workload into the cloud and be able to take advantage of the cloud as they start using it.
Yeah, and the point you just made about different cloud environments is really valuable as well, it seems to me, because even within an organization, but certainly if you have a merger or an acquisition, even within an organization, you will have different departments using different cloud environments. And what you're talking about now is creating this sort of virtual cloud to on-prem or cloud to cloud reconciliation pathway. Is that right?
Yeah. And in fact, I'll take an example. We were talking to, in fact, one of our customers. What they had is a very distributed mechanism for their IT. This is probably because of the way the organization grew with a lot of complexity around it. And essentially, at some point, they decided that they wanted to start consolidating all the resources and manage it more from a central perspective. And one of the things that they did was they, as they had their workloads running in different countries, essentially they started migrating those applications from those different countries into AWS. And then over a period of time, their roadmap is to migrate their central IT infrastructure also into AWS, thereby thus allowing them to manage everything from a single source, single location, or even if it's a distributed location, at least all the assets will be running in one place. So immediately they start realizing benefits of the cloud then. So not only are you making the process of migrating the applications easy, but at the same time the management of that becomes much simpler.
Yeah, that is really, really cool stuff. It seems to me it's going to be a central player going forward because you're not going to have one cloud. You're going to have a multi-cloud environment really no matter what industry you're in. So that I have to take my hat off to you already. That's really good stuff. Go ahead.
Right. So what I'll do next is I'll just talk a little bit about the different use cases that we solve and provide you some value proposition, and then we'll get a little more into the technical details of things. So if you really look at the use cases that we solve, CloudVelox has always focused on 4 use cases. One is the disaster recovery. That's basically availability of your infrastructure or business continuity, if you will. Now, of course, you've got to remember, we're moving things over the internet, so obviously we're talking about asynchronous replication. We're not talking about synchronous replication where almost everything's available instantaneously within a second. But that is one use case. The second use case that we focus on is enabling customers to migrate their existing workload or applications into the cloud. So a lot of customers are running their IT data centers, and their data centers are coming up with their lease. The lease is coming up, and so they are deciding whether they want to continue to run that stack and manage that stack on their own, or they want to go to someone like an AWS that enables them to focus more on managing and running their application versus managing the infrastructure. So migrating applications into the cloud has become a big use case from a CloudVelox perspective. The third use case that is often not talked about but is something very useful from a dev test organization perspective is what I would call as a data center extension, where you're not looking at the cloud as a secondary data center for migrating workload or making it for DR, but basically you're using it literally as a second data center. That means you have certain workloads, your production. So let's take the case of an Oracle application that typically customers have deployed, and everyone knows historically that you need at least 7 copies of the data before you actually have a production copy, all the way from dev, test, pre-production, staging, everything, QA, UAT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what the cloud does is by having a production workload running or being protected in the cloud, using CloudVelox, you can actually clone those instances and make it available immediately. And as soon as they're launched, they have built-in mechanisms to go back into your production data center for LDAP authentication if that is the process that you have followed, thereby allowing the customers to run the dev test environment in the cloud, but yet have the security mechanisms running within your own data center and having that level of protection, which is something at least some of the customers that are using us for dev tests have found it very useful. The burst stretch application for spikes is something very new. I mean, it's not new in the sense of a concept, but from a enterprise usage perspective, it is still in the kind of, I would call it an upcoming market. We haven't seen that many use cases or customers jump onto these use cases, although there are a few customers who have expressed some interest there. But the idea of that is basically you have a heavily used IT infrastructure locally, and now you need to burst some applications into the cloud. How do you do that? Or, for example, you want to scale those applications in the cloud. How do you do that? And so keeping all these things in mind, some of the unique value proposition that CloudVelox provides is basically we enable the customer to achieve some of these use cases without really re-architecting their applications, which is very important because if you look at customers who are running their production environment, they have optimized their production environment to the nth degree, and so they have made it as optimal as possible, both from a performance perspective, from an availability perspective, from a configuration of the parameters and how they distribute their software, et cetera. So we enable the migration or production of these applications into AWS or other clouds for that matter without re-architecting their application. The second thing is the network service extensions that I talked to you about. Essentially, by allowing a customer to go back to their data center for LDAP or AD authentication, what it provides is it provides a very powerful mechanism for the end user to confidently launch dev test user environment in the cloud without having to worry about some of the security aspects. And then from a DR perspective, one of the key things that people often talk about is the recovery point objective and then the recovery time objective. The recovery point objective is basically how much data do I lose once when something bad happens to my data center. The recovery time objective is basically once I know that something bad has happened, how long will it take for me to recover my infrastructure? So some of the surveys that we have done internally have indicated that a lot of customers, about at least 80% of the customers in this or the enterprise is still in the 2 hours to 12 hours or 24 hours and beyond time range in the RPO side, and we can reduce that all the way down to 30 minutes or less. In the case of RTO, we can shrink it down to as low as 15 minutes, depending on the application and the operating system, of course. But these are critical things from a customer's data availability, application availability perspective. And the fact that we can automate, we have automated all of this across all these use cases and provide a single user interface that allows the customer to kind of monitor these things is a huge benefit to the customer, and that also reduces their overall cost because we're leveraging some of the benefits of the cloud by about 50 to 60%.
And how long would it take, so for a particular application, because I think this burst stretch concept is really quite powerful, how long would it take for you guys to come into a client, understand a particular application that's running some particular function for the business, and then create the bridge for that application? What does that process look like? And I know you're probably going to talk about this in the next slide or two, but if you could just kind of give some insight on exactly how that happens and roughly how much time it would happen depending upon the complexity.
Sure. So let me take the example of, for example, the business continuity in the DR use case, right? So essentially, if you have a application stack, let's say that's running 10 servers, maybe there's one database server, there may be about 3 to 4 application servers and about 6 web servers. So basically, you have that is what we call as an application workload. So from a CloudVelox perspective, we look at not just as an individual server, but we look at the whole thing as an application stack. And our goal is basically to make that application that's made up of these 10 servers immediately available in the cloud. So the key thing to remember is the data transfer rate, how soon you can make that available in the cloud depends totally on 2 things. One is how frequently is your data changing, and then the second thing is how big is as a pipe you can provide us to move that application workload into the cloud or replicate that application workload into the cloud. So obviously, the bigger, the fatter the pipe, the better we are. the faster it is. And this has got nothing to do with us as much as physics, right? And then the key thing to remember is that we also take advantage of the bigger, fatter pipe by not just consuming all of it, but we also compress the data as we move the data across over to the cloud. So we are trying to use it as optimally as possible, but at the same time, I think that the physics is one of the things that will hold you back. If you don't have a big pipe, then you're going to be delayed in that, in terms of how long it will take. So for an average customer, if you have, let's say, about a terabyte of data and you have, let's say, about 10 servers, then it could take anywhere from 4 days to 7 days to put it all together into the cloud, have a pristine copy available in the cloud. And once you have it, then launching of the applications, like I said, is anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how much time your database server or everything else takes to bring it up. So the key thing is some of the factors to consider is how fat a pipe you have, what is the change rate, and then the process of installing our software is literally across 10 systems. It should not take more than 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and it's a completely non-disruptive process. So that means there is no reboot of applications or systems or anything. And one of the cool things that we do is we not only capture what changes that are happening, but we also capture the changes on at the operating system level. So if you apply any patches to your systems, even those are captured and made available in the cloud.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you about licenses and how you handle all that. You can say that for the end if you want, but I'm just kind of curious if you borrow the client licenses for the software, or if you guys get your own, or kind of how you handle that whole side of the equation. Yeah,
so essentially it's like with any vendor who is working in the cloud today. Obviously none of the vendors who are operating in that market will accept an OEM license, so you need to have an enterprise license for your application. And for DR use cases, typically most of these enterprise licenses are applicable because what you're doing is you're essentially running a copy of your authorized license in a situation where it is not, your primary data center is not available.
I see. Yep, that makes sense.
Right? Or at the worst case, you're doing some tests, and the test typically lasts anywhere from 8 hours to 24 hours to 36 hours, depending on how complex your application stack is that you're testing. And because you can test it on a segmented basis, that means you can test one part of the application and then another part of the application and then another part. So that allows a lot of flexibility.
It sure does. All right, cool. Go ahead.
Okay, so let me give you a little bit more about the platform architecture itself. Let me talk a little bit about what are the things that we do and what makes us unique in the marketplace. So I talked earlier about extending the data center into the cloud, right? I mean, we're basically providing a transparent access of the enterprise services into the cloud and via secure network extension. So when I talk about secure network extension, what I basically mean is that we ensure that all the traffic that goes from your data center to the cloud is all encrypted, and so nothing can be kind of lost in the translation, if you will. And then the second thing that we do is we also ensure that the data that is sitting in the cloud at rest, that is once it's been replicated, that is also encrypted. So that ensures that no one can kind of accidentally log into the system and do things to that. And having the the LDAP authentication for the use case of dev test, like I talked about earlier, makes it even more secure from the perspective that the users have to be authenticated by your application, or your application users have to be authenticated from your data center that is running in your control, in your environment, before they have access to some of these things. And then the fact that we support a multi-tier application service. So as I mentioned earlier, we don't necessarily look at replication as a server-by-server basis, rather than we look at the availability of the entire application stack. So if you have a multi-server deployment, then we can mobilize that entire application to or from the cloud, and we will continuously synchronize this multi-tier application and the ecosystem around it, including the database and file servers, et cetera, into the cloud. So one of the unique things that we offer in the marketplace that draws quite a bit of distinction for CloudVelox compared to the rest of the competition, if you will, is the fact that not only can we protect your enterprise-class database systems, but we can also protect your NFS file servers if you're running in your data center. And with the enterprise-class database servers, for example, Oracle, we have multiple mechanisms to protect it. We can protect it using CloudVelox software itself. Alternately, if what we have found in the marketplace, particularly in the Fortune 500 customers that we deal with, is that they are so comfortable and used to using some of the native tools like the Oracle RMAN or Oracle Data Guard that they would prefer to use that versus using CloudVelox for replicating the data files at least. And so we allow that level of integration within our platform, so a customer could basically protect everything using CloudVelox, and then just the database files and everything else could be protected using Oracle Data Guard. And to add to that, we provide a single cloud control. What it means is basically you have a single user interface that allows you to manage across these multiple stacks or multiple applications across multiple use cases. So basically at the click of a button, you can make systems available once either for cloning, for dev test like I mentioned earlier, or to migrate the application into the cloud, or for that matter to launch a failover test. And the nice thing about some of these capabilities is that when you launch a failover test, for example, you are actually creating a separate copy of the instances that is being protected in the cloud, and thereby you don't have to stop the replication process. So your data from your production environment is still being protected while it gives you the benefit of testing the application at will. Now, what I found, talking again to customers is all that sounds very nice from a technical perspective, but the biggest bang for the buck is for system administrators or IT administrators who previously had to, come in over the weekend when no one is using the system and, skip some of their personal engagements that they might be having and having to come and spend in an IT data center doing some of these testing. Now they can actually do this during daytime, during normal business work week. So that gives them a lot of benefit in terms of their personal time off. And the fact that we support multiple clouds from the same environment, from the same user interface, that is, we can work with AWS and Windows Azure, and OpenStack is something that is available right now. I would call it more as a beta versus a launch product, but that is also a big benefit to the customer, that we are looking at not just what is available now, but what will become available in the future, both from a public hyperscale public cloud perspective, but also building out large data centers within the enterprise itself using OpenStack.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you've got people on your team who are focused on staying on top of what Amazon Web Services is doing, what Microsoft is doing with Azure, and so on and so forth, right? And you probably have some kind of a repository, like a knowledge base that other users can access to understand how to deal with these different environments, right?
Right, and that is one of the unique things, right? Like I mentioned earlier, imagine you're an IT organization and the directive comes from your business unit that, hey, reduce cost, and you go about investigating and you find that maybe you want to run certain applications in Azure for your Microsoft-centric application, and then you want to run all your Linux applications in AWS, just to kind of diversify your portfolio, if you will. Now, that means typically you would have to go and either engage consultants and in a large scale, and even finding good consultants is a challenge because they're also very busy. And then alternately, you would have to go and learn all the APIs and try to see what benefit, how do you leverage some of these things. Now, with our software, we're basically eliminating at least majority of those functions. I'm not saying that that the learning part of it is completely shut out, but at least some of the key aspects, like how do you grow volumes automatically, how do you apply patches and make that available instantaneously on the other side, how do you do these network extensions, all of those things are kind of built into the product. So you really don't have to learn some of those APIs and things like that. While you still might have to know some of the terminologies and what you're using, it's like any other tool, right? The more you know better, the better off you are, but it doesn't mean that you have to become an expert in the tool in order to do some of the basic IT functionality that you've been tasked with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it also makes sense to have a resource such as you guys provide for understanding the disparities between different cloud environments. Like you said, Azure is probably fine-tuned for Microsoft applications, whereas AWS may have had more of a tight focus on Linux applications. So having a broker to help you understand when, where, and how to use those different environments, I have to think is pretty useful. Yeah,
it is. And again, we have large enterprise customers running their entire IT in AWS for that matter, right? Both Windows and Linux workloads. So, by all means, I'm not trying to pit one cloud vendor against the other. All I'm pointing out is that with our software, we make it possible for a company that is potentially looking to take advantage of these multiple cloud offerings. But I mean, in my experience at least, it has so far been that majority, at least I would say 90%, 95% of the customers are focused on AWS. And I think the reasons are quite obvious, only because of the fact that they're the largest in the market, and they have, for example, the maximum number of services available, and the level of innovation that they have brought into the market is huge compared to any other cloud vendors by far. And others are trying to do a catch-up game. So it's very interesting, at least from a software vendor perspective, and I look at the market and see where things are going. And again, from purely CloudVelox selfish perspective, I would call it, the fact that you now have these global infrastructures available, and if you have a enterprise that has got offices in multiple locations, I can deploy my software and the customers can protect their applications or migrate their applications across the scale, across the globe uniformly. It means you don't have to worry about if the infrastructure running in the U.S. is different from the infrastructure running in Germany or Singapore or Sydney or for that matter. So for me, it provides a common platform, which is a huge, huge benefit from not just CloudVelox perspective, but also from an end user perspective.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's great stuff. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the next few slides, this slide specifically talks about how we, what is the engagement process, right? I think one of the interesting questions that you had asked earlier about is, where do you use it? How do you deploy it? How does this whole thing work? So essentially, there are two components to our software. One is the part that runs in the cloud, and look at it more as the receiver of data and capture of data that holds everything together and makes it available when you want it. And the other element is the one that runs on your individual servers, your virtual machines or whatever. So from a CloudVelox perspective, we are agnostic to the hypervisor that you're using. You could be using ESX, Hyper-V, Zen, whatever hypervisor that you're comfortable with. We operate at the guest OS level if you're using a virtualized infrastructure. Alternately, if you're running physical servers, then we protect those physical servers as well, whether you're running a Windows 2003, 2008, 2012, or whether you're running a Red Hat Linux or Ubuntu or CentOS or whatever flavor of Linux. So essentially, our software gets deployed or installed at the guest OS level or at the physical server level. And once we deploy our software in your servers, whatever use case you're supporting, whether you're doing migration, disaster recovery, or data center extension, whatever use case you want to support, a secure network extension is established between the cloud and your environment. And the next thing that happens is, and these are things that happen automatically behind the scenes, so you're not doing anything other than the only thing you have done so far is install the software on your servers. That's it. And that's, like I said, it's a 5-minute process on a per server basis, but if you have a mechanism to distribute your software across all the platforms that you want to protect, then you can use that mechanism as well. The first thing it does is the software, it discovers the host, understands whether it's a physical or a virtual machine, creates some sort of a application and maps the dependencies and creates a blueprint of that application in the cloud so that we now know how much CPU you're using, what's the power of the CPUs, how much memory, what operating system version, what's the workload characterization, so on and so forth. Once we get that, then the next thing that we need to do is we need to provision the storage volumes in the cloud. So because you now have, let's say, 10 servers comprising a total of about 30 volumes, and you need all this data to be synced. Because remember, when you're running something in the cloud, it doesn't mean that you don't, you're kind of hidden away from the fact that how your server operates or how your application has been deployed in your production environment. If, for example, your database server depended on a C drive, if it's a Windows server, if you will, and then a D drive for all the database files, and then a E drive for all your binaries or anything else that might be running, then we need to make sure that a similar thing is available in the cloud, and otherwise the database system will not come up because the system is recognizing a certain fact and it is expecting certain things to be available when it boots up. So we need to make the same thing available in the cloud. Now what we do is we do all these things automatically behind the scenes, so you're not kind of going in and creating some of these environments using keyboards. It's all done magically for you. So we provision the necessary storage volumes, and once the storage volumes are provisioned, then there's a replication process that starts that asynchronously replicates all the data from your production environment, and it doesn't matter where that production environment is, whether it's in your own data center, it's in a colo, it's in a third-party cloud, wherever it is. I can take all the data and then put it into the cloud that you're protecting in. And this is a continuous process, and over a period of time, once you reach a steady state, that means you have, let's say, the initial copy available, then it's also just a differential sync, so that means any changes that are happening is the only thing that is getting sent across and being captured. And at that point, basically, you've reached what I call as a pilot light. And the reason I call it a pilot light is because in the cloud, where you are protecting or migrating the application, you are not necessarily running these instances in the cloud. You just have the core set of compute resources available and all the storage volumes that are required to protect your application. You're not actually running your entire data center in the cloud. So that means you're saving a lot of money by not running the compute infrastructure itself. And once you determine that, hey, I want to do a migration, a failover, a continuous integration, whatever use case that you want to do, then you light up those instances in the cloud and make them available for the period of time you want it available. So, for example, we have customers who will launch the application. They will do a failover test for a period of 8 hours, and they'll consume their AWS resources for 8 hours, and they pay the compute charge only for that 8 hours. So imagine how much cost saving that could bring to a company who might otherwise have to recreate that environment in a physical manner and not only run it and manage it, but also make that available to be used only maybe 1 month in a year. Right? So with some of the advantages running this in the cloud is that you pay as you go, you pay for what you use, and the only other thing that you're paying on a continuous basis is for the storage, which obviously is being replicated. And being in the cloud, some of these cloud vendors, their pricing is so effective and is that it's almost nothing when it comes to replicating the data into the cloud. So big benefit to the customer, and also all of these things being automated also means it reduces their cost tremendously and time, which is in fact one of the most overlooked soft costs, if you will. You don't have to send people to the second location. You don't have to worry about how do I make these resources fire up? What about all the changes that I'm doing in my production environment? Have they been captured? All of those things are taken care of for you by the CloudVelox software automatically behind the scenes. So with that, I'll take a pause and then see if you have any questions on this. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, this is really fascinating stuff. I love the concept of the blueprint, and what you're really doing here, especially for an organization that has a data center, let's say, is you're enabling elasticity of that data center as needed. So, for example, if you're a retailer, obviously there are retailers who have tremendous spikes of traffic around Christmas time, from the Thanksgiving holidays through to shortly after Christmas or New Year's or something like that. And you're allowing them to use their existing data center, then stretch it out into the cloud just for the period of time that they need it, and then contract back to their usual environment, right?
Correct. Actually, you bring up a very interesting point. So I was talking about this recently in one of the AWS Summit that I attended to one of the enterprises that had come visiting our booth, and this is actually a retail company. And what I mentioned to them is that with our software, we actually allow a customer to create different recovery policies, if you will. So you could imagine a peak hour recovery policy and a non-peak hour recovery policy. And by that, what it means is that, let us say you're protecting your application, let's say for disaster recovery in the cloud. During peak hours, the transaction volumes are going to be high in your data center, let's say like a Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever, right? And then when it comes to normal operating days, the transaction volumes are going to be lower, or at least lower than whatever those key holiday periods are. So essentially, you could create two policies, right? One is for the peak hour recovery and one is for the non-peak hour recovery. And in the peak hour recovery, you could change your selection. So for example, within a software, when you're launching an application, you can select, or before you even launch an application, you can create a policy and save it and say, hey, when I launch these applications, the peak hour failover policy, what it will do is it will pick up the provisioned IOPS from Amazon for a storage perspective, and then when I do the non-peak hour, I'll choose magnetic drives, right? So the flexibility that it provides the customer to create such policies and save it and then just launch it at will without having to go in and think about some of these changes and how to handle some of these changes is a huge benefit to the customer. And I think that is the not just about the elasticity of the resource, if you will, but the fact that it allows you to kind of leverage the cloud the way you want your applications to be running at a certain point in time so that you can deliver the necessary level of customer satisfaction is a big, big win for customers.
Yeah, that's really cool stuff. You could have different policies depending upon what the priorities are and have all sorts of different attributes to those policies. It enables flexibility and agility, and that's, of course, just good for the customer. And I'm kind of wondering, as I look at this, I love this blueprint concept. I mean, obviously, it's what you have to do in order to do your job effectively. When you take a blueprint of a particular environment, let's say a very complex environment, you've mapped out these dependencies, do you ever find situations where you can go back to the client and say, hey, we noticed that you have this dependency map. We've actually seen this before and would recommend that you do a slightly more simplified version. Do you ever find that you learn things that you can then share with these companies to modify their on-prem environments?
So it's, again, a very interesting question, right? I mean, the way I look, I just identify these things that you just talked about as patterns, right? Because you might have seen certain patterns of being deployed in the cloud, and you might say, this this approach might be more efficient versus another approach. Now, one of the things that we enable in our software is to create these patterns, if you will, on the fly, right? I mean, when we know all the servers that you're predicting. So, for example, let's say you have a failover environment. I keep pivoting to the failover because it allows you to kind of leverage all the servers to be protected. That's the only reason, right? So when you're doing a failover and you have, let's say, 10 servers, and like I said, you have 6 web servers, 3 app servers, and 1 database server. Now, you might decide that, hey, you know what, when I do a dev test, I don't really need these 6 web servers and 3 app servers. I just need 1 of each, right? So that might be my dev test pattern, and it might be that I use, you know, magnetic disk for standard QA testing, and then SSD disk or provisioned IOPS for, you know, performance testing. So you can create these application patterns, if you will, and save that, and then launch that whenever you want for whatever test that you're doing, and modify it as you go. And that's, once again, it enables the customer to have that flexibility to change these patterns. And while we are not actively coming in and telling what patterns are better versus the other, and one of the key things to remember is how our software gets deployed, right? We are deploying our software in, we have 2 models, but one of the things that we have learned over a period of time, particularly talking to like the Fortune 500 type of companies that we have dealt with, or even the Fortune 1000, is that customers are as such paranoid about their data, particularly with all these breaches that are going on. Now they're becoming even more paranoid, and they're saying, we want anything that you do, particularly if it comes to the cloud, we have a different set of security policies, and hence we want everything to be deployed in our account. So that means a customer has got an AWS account, and our software is getting deployed into the customer account. And once you do that, you know, from a CloudVelox perspective, as a SaaS vendor, some of the benefits that you got by having the ability to observe patterns and kind of provide recommendation to the end user, that kind of goes away, right? Because we have no longer any visibility into anything that the customer is doing, and the customer is in full control of it. Now, what it gives, the benefit it gives to us is the fact that by enabling such capability, the ability to deploy our software in customer account, we are able to work with larger and larger customers. So recently, we're working with one of the what we call civilian agencies in the federal government, which has got a large number of servers to migrate. And so, you know, we're able to operate in that world. So from a CloudVelox perspective, from a business perspective, it's a huge benefit. But where we lose some of the benefit that we could otherwise have communicated back to a wider set of audiences in developing some of these patterns. Now, needless to say, we have certain of our own test environments, and we are always experimenting to find out what works best. And so we're always willing to share those best practices.
Yeah, that's great stuff. That really is. And what I love about this, if you think about companies trying to go to the cloud, there is, of course, a great deal of trepidation in just worrying about making sure every bit of functionality that needs to get there is going to get there. And then there's the big concern about moving out of the cloud. So you don't want to have lock-in wherever you go. And it seems to me what you guys are enabling here is this pathway, again, to the cloud, not just for data, not just for disaster recovery of data or even of applications, but of workloads themselves. And you kind of open the door to people trying this cloud environment. If it doesn't work, move over and try that cloud environment. So you're really enabling a great deal of cloud-oriented agility for the enterprise. Is that
exactly? So the last slide that I have is basically, obviously, this is one of quite a bit of recognition, and the fact that we can run physical or virtualized apps running on-prem or in the cloud, Windows or Linux, enables us to kind of lead in this marketplace. And really, one of the things that we have observed over a period of time is that Like, for example, I think a few months ago, we had a webinar with one of our customers, and they literally saved a boatload of money, if you will. They had 2 data centers, one in Las Vegas, one in Virginia, and their Las Vegas data center was coming up for renewal, and they basically decided that, hey, you know what, let's see if we can, instead of running another data center, let's see if we can migrate this and protect this applications into AWS. And they did that. They have about 120 servers plus that it comprises of physical and virtual servers, MySQL databases, all kinds of complex applications that they're running. And they were able to achieve that and basically shut down their one of their data centers in Las Vegas. So, or rather, their data center in Las Vegas. So now what they have is one in Virginia that is basically being protected in AWS. And who knows what their future roadmap would be. But the point is that by achieving these kinds of, or seeing these kinds of results is really encouraging from a CloudVelox perspective. And also, you know, you had to be there in AWS New York or AWS San Francisco. The amount of people or enterprises that are coming in to try to understand what is happening in the cloud, you know, understand what they can, how they can take advantage of some of the cloud features or capabilities is really, really tremendous and very encouraging from a CloudVelox perspective.
Yeah, that's great stuff, and I'm looking over my my notes here and just making sure we dot all our I's and cross all our T's. So one or two final questions. Who do you typically liaise with at a company? Is it that sort of director of IT operations? Is it like the COO or something? Who and how do you manage those relationships? Do you kind of dig deeper and have multiple different people you work with, or do you try to channel through one person or one team? How does that work?
So we have seen these initiatives come from all kinds of sources within an organization, right? I mean, many times it is the CIO level kind of, or director of IT, or someone being made responsible for the cloud strategy itself. Or sometimes it's kind of the CTO type of organization, which is kind of looking at new ways, and it all depends on the company. Or in the medium scale business, of course, it's basically the line of business owner or the business owner themselves that are looking at saying, hey, I'm running this and I want to save money, and you know, I don't want to be running the infrastructure anymore. What can you do to help me? So the type of people that we interact, or the level of people that we interact, kind of changes on a day-to-day basis, and the customer base itself. But needless to say, it's across the board. But the way we engage with them is also, it's part of it. I would say in the medium-sized business, they are more aware of what the cloud is. They're just not sure about how they can take advantage. Whereas in the large enterprises, they're not only aware, but they're educated about the cloud, and so they've already tested a few systems, and they're saying, hey, we have done these things, and now I want to expedite it. So, for example, they might say, I've migrated 5 servers. I've done this manually in the past, and I don't have the time or bandwidth to do this. Now I need to migrate everything automatically fast, or I want to do it without any disruption to my system. So how can you help out in that process? So the level of education that we have to provide on the cloud itself kind of varies depending on the type of customer and type of business that we are talking to. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess one last question here. You know, you mentioned this client where you're helping them consolidate multiple data centers, like maybe 3 or 4 down to 2 or even 1. And boy, if you want to talk about cost savings and complexity savings, right? Simplification is going to be a real mantra going forward, it seems to me. And you guys, it would appear, are providing this really nice, this marshaling area, if you will, or this point of departure for being able to allow companies to do exactly that, to consolidate, let's say, 2 data centers down to 1, just by getting visibility into the different kinds of workloads and really understanding what is being done, how it can be done more effectively, more cost effectively, more efficiently. if you're able to go from 2 data centers to 1, that is just a massive cost savings, right?
Yeah, it is, and you know, it's one of the things that we also learned along the way is that each data center operates very differently in terms of their security posture, and so one of the big advantages for the company itself by going to the cloud is that they can have a common security posture that could be applied across the board. And so when an application is launched, if you will, in a VPC within AWS, because that was the use case that was prevalent in this customer's case, then the customer could define certain security postures or security groups, if you will, within the VPC. And now any system that gets launched into that VPC will have the same security posture. So now no longer are you operating in a world where, you know, one IT administrator thought about security in one way and then another IT administrator thought about security in a different way. Now you have uniformity across the board, which is, again, a big benefit to the end user. And with CloudVelox, again, the advantage is that while we inherently bring in all the security groups that you have on your systems, we can adapt that to, or rather when you're launching your applications, you could adapt it to take advantage of whatever security groups or posture you might have created for the cloud. So giving that flexibility to the customer in you know, taking advantage of the security postures that you might have created in the cloud gives a big benefit to the customer in terms of how they approach security, because security, trust me, is on the top of everyone's mind, IT administrators particularly, and the more uniformity that they have across the board, the less you know, worried they would be when they go to bed.
Yeah, and that's going to keep those compliance-related employees happy too, right? Because
exactly.
And you have multiple. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying having that common standard is kind of becomes very critical.
Yeah, it sure does. Well, folks, this has been a fantastic session. Vasu, thank you so much for your time today. CloudVelox is the company. You can find them online at cloudvelox.com. I think you guys are at the nexus of cloud and on-prem, and that's a very good place to be, so congratulations.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having more conversations.
Okay, take care, folks. You have been listening to The Deep Dive, the first ever. There will be many more. We have several others slated already, and you can find them online at insideanalysis.com. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.